Hi Jody, this is Professor Megan Bunnell. I received your email and saw that you had trouble with questions 12 and you also had trouble with the square root function. So I wanted to send you a quick video on how to solve questions 12 and 13 since those two problems have square roots. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me and we can try to clear up some confusion. Now this problem, question 12, says 2 times the square root of negative 25 plus 5 times the square root of negative 49. The first thing we need to notice is that there's a negative sign underneath the square root bar. And we need to recall that the square root of negative 1 equals the letter I. So to get rid of the negative sign underneath the square root, all we do is just put an I outside of the square root or next to it. So for instance, 2 times the square root of negative 25 equals 2 times I times the square root of positive 25. So if you see, I got rid of that negative sign by placing an I next to the square root. I'm going to do the same with this. This becomes 5I times the square root of positive 49. Okay, so I got rid of the negative sign underneath the square root, and it became an I on the outside. Now I need to simplify the square root of 25. So you can do this on your calculator by doing the square root 25, or I know that 5 times 5 is 25, so the square root of 25 is just 5, and that's because the square root searches for pairs of 2 of a kind. So the square root of 25 equals the square root of 5 times 5, and it searches for pairs of 2 of a kind, so there's my pair of 5s, so a single 5 comes out, and the square root goes away. So again, the square root of 25 is just the number 5. So I'm going to multiply 2I by 5. The square root of 49 is 7, because 7 times 7 is 49. So I'm going to multiply 5I by 7. All right, so in my next step, I'm going to take this term by term. 2I times 5 is just 10I, and I found that by multiplying the 5 times the 2, and I have to include the I in there. Now the next term is 5I times 7. 7 times 5 is 35, so this becomes 35I. Now I want to add these two terms together. And these are like terms because they both have the same letter. So I'm going to add 10I plus 35I. 10I plus 35I is 45I. And I found that just by adding 10 to 35. So my answer is 45I. That's my final answer for question 12. All right, I also want to do question 13 for you, or with you. So question 13 says negative 4 minus the square root of negative 18 all divided by 24. Now the first thing you'll notice is that I have a negative sign underneath my square root. And remember, we want to get rid of the negatives underneath the square root. And to do that, we're just going to write an I on the outside of the square root. So this problem becomes negative 4 minus I times the square root of positive 18. And this is all over 24. Now I want to simplify the square root of 18. I'm going to take 18 and I want to figure out two numbers that when multiplied together will give me 18. Well, I know that 2 times 9 gives me 18. Now I want to keep on factoring those numbers to get a set of prime factors. Okay, so 2 is already prime. I don't have any other two numbers that when multiplied together will give me 2. So 2 is already prime. Now 9, I can multiply 3 times 3 together to get 9. So now if I look at each of these values, I want to see if I can factor those. And I can't. Those are all prime numbers. So I know that the prime factorization of 18 is 2 times 3 times 3. So if I go to simplify the square root of 18, this equals the square root of 2 times 3 times 3. Now remember, the square root searches for pairs of two of a kind, or a pair of two of a kind. So that means that I have two 3's. So when the pair comes out of the square root, it becomes a single number. So this becomes a single 3. That means that this is simplified to 3 square root 2. I can't do anything with the 2 since it doesn't have another 2 next to it. It's just alone. So the square root of 18 is simplified to 3 square root 2. I'm going to write this simplification in my problem. I'll just substitute it up here. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite the problem. I have negative 4 minus I times 3 square root 2, all over 24. Now for notation purposes, we usually write the number in front of the letter. So I'm just going to flip-flop those two things. So instead of I3, I'm just going to write 3I. It's the same thing. This is just the proper way to write it. Okay, now we want to simplify this answer. And if you'll notice, we have a fraction bar here. So I'm going to separate each term in the numerator into a fraction. So the first term is a negative 4. So I'll just write negative 4 over 24. And then I'll write the minus sign. And then I'll write the second term, which is 3I square root 2. And that is also over 24. These two things are the same. I just separated it, so each term is now over 24 instead of just writing one denominator. Now I want to look at each fraction individually and see if I can simplify the fraction. So if we look at 4 and 24, what number is divisible by 4 and 24? Well, 4 is divisible by 4, and 24 is also divisible by 4. It can be divided into 24 evenly. So I'm going to divide the top and bottom of this fraction by 4. So negative 4 divided by 4 is a negative 1. And then 24 divided by 4 is 6. So my simplified fraction is negative 1/6. Now I'm going to look at my second term. And I just dropped the subtraction sign down into my answer. So now I'll look at the second term. And we only want to look at the whole numbers when simplifying. So I'm just going to look at this 3 and I'm going to look at the 24, and I'm going to see if I can simplify those two values. So 3 over 24. So 24 and 3 are both divisible by 3. So I can divide the top and bottom by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 24 divided by 3 is 8. So I can write 1i square root 2 over 8. Now, 1 multiplied by anything is just that something. So I really don't need to write that 1 there. So I'm going to erase the 1. So my answer is negative 1/6 minus I square root 2 divided by 8. And that is my final reduced simplified answer. Please let me know if you have any questions. I hope this helps a little. Again, email me. You also have my phone number. It's listed on the announcements page of your course if you want to give me a call.